everyone, welcome back to the drawing board. In this video I'm going to give you a quick run through of a full length project that we've been drawing over on Patreon recently. The full project takes about 4.5 hours to draw, and if you want to follow along with the full tutorial you will find that over on Patreon now. It comes with a reference photograph, a line drawing, a list of all the colours of pencils that I'm using, and as we go through the full project on Patreon, the name of the pencil is on the screen at all times. I'm drawing with colour pencils on Bristol paper. As we go through the video, I'll explain a little bit of the process for drawing the Kingfisher, show you how I layer up the colours and build some of the colours on the page, and show you how I create this lovely soft feather texture on the bird's chest. So I hope you enjoy the video, and let's get started. So as always, I start with the eye of a drawing. I've got a nice sharp dark brown pencil and I'm paying particular attention to the reference photograph and just plotting in that eye to get the drawing started. Once I'm happy with the outline and the shape of the eye, I use a white pencil to put a base layer of white all the way over the inside of the eye before I start to add the blue and the brown colours into the eye. And this means that I've got a really good base layer down on the paper, so that if I want to go back in with a slice tool or a craft knife and remove out some of the pigment to bring the highlights back in, I can do that because I've got that lovely white base layer down on the paper to start with. Once I've added the blues and greens into the iris of the eye, I start to shape the outside of the eye and start to blend it out into the Kingfisher's face, and I do that with a really dark pencil. I'm using dark sepia here. As I move on to the face of the Kingfisher, I start by laying down a nice even base layer of the white pencil, and then using light pressure and working in the direction that the feathers would be travelling from the beak towards the back of the head, I start to build up the beautiful turquoise and blue colours. I used a combination of luminance and Pablo pencils to mix the particular shade of Kingfisher blue that I wanted on the paper, but of course you can use any turquoise, blue, green pencils that you've got. There are so many ways to mix this lovely, beautiful, bright turquoise blue colour. I work in a similar way under the eye and around the side of the eye. I start with a lovely light yellow cream base layer and then work in with a selection of oranges, again working the pencils in the direction that the feathers would be going, blending the orange areas into the blue area as I go. I start to bring in a little bit of detail with a brown colour. I use a green pencil to pick out little bits of the Kingfisher's head where I can see little flashes of green on the reference photograph. I've worked on the blue area and I've worked on the orange area, but I want to make sure that they work together and come together as part of the drawing. So I'm using the green pencil to blend one area into another. And then once I've blended any areas that might need to be just a little bit more vibrant, I bring in a brighter blue and pull that through the feathers to add a bit of extra brightness and saturation where it's needed. Once I'm happy with the colours that are on the top of the head, I start to bring in the pattern with a brown pencil. I'm not worried if the pattern's not exactly as it is on the reference photograph. It's just a suggestion of the pattern of the feathers on top of the Kingfisher's head. One final thing that I do is to use my eraser to bring through a few very soft suggestions of the feathers, a little bit of detail here and there. I'm using this eraser to bring in the larger, softer marks that I want, and if I want something really detailed and finer, then I'll use my craft knife, or you could use a slice tool to bring in those extra details. I start the beak again with a base layer. Here I'm using a really soft, pale, peachy pink colour, and then I start to bring in some of the definition of the beak quite early on with a dark brown pencil. I've also used a little bit of orange that I used under the eye on the head of the Kingfisher. I've brought that into the beak and also brought a little bit of the brown in to start to get the structure of that beak in place. I darken down the bottom half of the beak with a black pencil. That's going to be darker. The top part of the beak is going to be lighter because obviously the light source is on the top. So by making the bottom part of the beak darker, it starts to create that roundness and starts to create the dimension of the beak. And then using a slightly lighter brown pencil, just bringing it all together, just blending out those dark lines into the pale pinky peach colour that we put down at the start, and just bringing all the shapes together and making the beak look blended. I work on the main feathers on the body of the Kingfisher all in one go. I start by applying an even base layer using an earthy ochre cream colour, and then a layer of quite a light orange colour to bring that peachiness through in the feathers on the body. Once the cream and the orange layers are down, I'm using a light brown pencil and following that direction that I can see the feathers go in from the reference photograph, I start to bring in a bit of depth and texture into the feathers, and then use the orange colour again to blend out the pencil marks that I can see, because it's all quite sketchy at the minute. So I'm blending out the pencil marks with the orange pencil and also starting to bring in some real saturated vibrant colours into this area. I don't want to bring the orange in everywhere or the brown in everywhere. You can see that I'm leaving lighter areas where the light might be catching the feathers, and that gives some interest to the drawing as a whole. I use exactly the same process for adding the blue-green feathers to the back of the Kingfisher that I used when I was drawing the head. And then I intensify those chest feathers again with oranges and yellows to really make those chest feathers become quite vibrant and saturated. One of the final stages of the chest feathers is to bring in those darker values. So I'm going back in with my brown pencil again to bring in that volume and make the body of the Kingfisher look rounded. I use my blue and green pencils again to make the feathers on the back of the Kingfisher a little bit more saturated. And then I use my brown pencil again to make sure that orange area and that turquoise area come together and transition nicely by creating a feathered effect between the two sections. I use my eraser to bring in some of the pattern detail on the back of the Kingfisher, and also bring in a little bit of volume using the eraser to bring in some lighter feathers on the chest area too. The feet and legs of the Kingfisher are really quite small, so I can't get much detail in here. So I start with a very pale orange base layer, add a little bit of detail with the dark brown pencil to just outline and start to shape the legs, and then bring in a bit of structure with the darker orange pencil. And then finally I use a dark pencil to bring in some of the darker values to start to get that dimension into the legs, and bring in a little bit of detail with my craft knife. For the branch that the Kingfisher is sitting on, I start with a base layer which is the same colour that I used for the beak, and then build up a selection of brown pencils, starting light to dark, blending as I go, bringing in a few highlights with the eraser and smoothing out any highlights that I've added. And that's it. Really hope that you have found this quick guide useful. If you want to find the full project, you can find that over on my Patreon channel now. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.